From one guest right into another, I'm joined by Stephen Willis of Locked On Ole Miss to talk about the team whose offseason I might love the most of any team in all of college football. That includes Oregon, by the way. I think Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin are building the best team he has had since he has been the head coach in Oxford. And there have been some good teams. This is an Ole Miss unit that just went 11-2, won a New Year's Six game against Penn State. That's no small feat. Penn State's been really good on New Year's Day under James Franklin in the past. I think that Ole Miss is doing a fantastic job. When you look at, the fact that they've lost Quinshon Judkins, and I don't feel like their offense is going to skip a beat. In fact, I feel like it could be even better, because they have brought in key portal additions. They've got Jaxson Dart coming back at quarterback. You, of course, still have Lane Kiffin there. They add guys like Walter Nolan on defense. Steven, this is the first year where I legitimately feel Ole Miss has a standard that includes getting into the SEC championship game. And I don't think that that is an unrealistic expectation, given that it's year one for Alabama. LSU is having transition on their defensive staff. They're trying to figure everything out down there. And the season that Ole Miss just had, what I think they're capable of next year, everyone they've brought in this year, everything that's been invested, that's where my mind is at. How are you feeling about the Rebels down in Oxford?
Well, I'm unbelievably giddy, honestly. If you look at what's going on, I've been following Ole Miss sports for nearly 50 years at this point. The first game that I saw and went to was in 1982. So it's been a long ride. And most of the time in Ole Miss games and in Ole Miss seasons, there's always like a yeah, but type situation. It's like Ole Miss is going to have a really good football team, but yeah, but something else would happen because there was a glass ceiling. There was a level that talent just, you couldn't get you past. Alabama was always going to have an advantage over Ole Miss. Auburn was going to have an advantage. LSU, because of the talent. That doesn't necessarily exist. And I was going through doing like preliminary W's and L's, looking at the schedule. And normally you look at it as like, okay, that's 3 L's, that's 7 W's, and there's some toss-ups. This one is like, hey, okay, I can see a toss-up, and I see a whole bunch of W's. And at that point, I just start laughing maniacally and walking around in a circle and drinking beer. I mean, that's all you can do if you're an Ole Miss fan.
Yeah, I think the transfer portal moves have been really good. They have the number one class on 24/7 Sports, and to me, that's not an inflated ranking or a phony ranking. It's one that I look at and the quality of players they've brought in, and I go, I feel like Ole Miss has gotten better. So let's go to the transfer portal and not even talk about all the returners. Sure, you have Quinshon Judkins leaving, as I mentioned, and some other departures as well, as is the case. Every roster goes through attrition there. But what stands out to you the most about this transfer portal class for Lane Kiffin?
Oh, the front seven. Walter Nolan and Princely Amon-Mielen have completely transformed defensively how this unit looks. When you add Chris Paul at middle linebacker with those two defensive linemen, because that means that J.J. Pegues and Jared Ivey, who was the alpha dog and the number 2 in command last year, they get to be the number 3 and the number 4 this year. And whenever that happens, honestly, you hate to talk about what's going on. It's like what's happening with Ole Miss basketball. Matthew Morrell was like the guy last year. They brought some transfers in. He became the third option, and all of a sudden, Matthew Morrell's the best player on the field or on the court. I think something similar is going to happen on the defensive line. You have a major pass rusher in Princely Amon-Mielen. Unbelievably impressed. Walter Nolan is the top player that's ever gotten into the transfer portal in the short time that there has been a transfer portal. And you have Chris Paul, who was a Butkus watch list award candidate, and TJ Dudley coming in, who had to sit out for most of last year, but got to play in the Peach Bowl. The front seven of this defense is going to make it to where the back seven looks really good. Whenever you were planning on having 2.5 to 3 seconds to throw the football, or you did last year, maybe this year it's 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds. Maybe a pass gets thrown a little bit off the target. The defensive back makes a pick, and all of a sudden, year when last year you needed 25, 26 points to comfortably feel like you're going to win a football game, This season, you might only need 15. You might only need 16 points to win a football game because of how good the defense is going to be.
Do you feel like that was the biggest weakness for Ole Miss going into the offseason? What was the defensive side of the ball? Lane Kiffin's teams have always been able to score points. He's gotten good production from his quarterbacks. Dart, I love having him in that system for another year. Was that the area that Ole Miss most needed to address in the transfer portal this offseason? And do you feel like they have done enough to be one of the best units, or at least an improved unit from a year ago in the SEC?
Yes, I think defensively they needed a little bit of work. They were pretty good defensively last year, but they were pretty good schematically, and they needed some dudes. Georgia kind of exposed them last year. They had trouble trying to stop LSU in that shootout that went up and down the field. Texas A&M with Bobby Petrino figured them out in the second half, and it took a blocked field goal to win that game. When you look at that happen, they realize, hey, we need to figure out a way to handle these deficiencies because these are the teams we're trying to compete with right now. Elite 5-star type athletes that we're going to line up against. We need players that compete with them. We don't just need good football players that have a ton of heart. The lunch pail warriors, the gym rats, those guys are going to be really good to a certain extent, but sometimes you just need dudes. And this Ole Miss defense is recruiting a good number of dudes on that side of the ball to the point where like Juice Wells and Logan Diggs and Daquan Wright, those players on the offensive side, those skill players that normally would be the talk of the offseason for Ole Miss football, nobody's even talking about.
The other thing they've done is added guys from the offensive line. So Washington's offensive line last year won the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line in all of college football, deservedly so. Ole Miss has added 2 guys from that Washington unit that were at the very least a part of it. Each had over 600 snaps, one of them over 900 snaps a season ago for the Huskies. So where do you see Julius Buelow and Nate Kalepo fitting into the rotation? Do you think that they are more complementary depth pieces, or are these guys who are going to step in and protect Jaxson Dart right away?
I think Kalepo is a plug and play guy. He's going to get on the field. He started 15 games last year. He's probably going to be penciled in at left guard. He's going to be playing next to Diego Pounds, the transfer that's coming in from North Carolina. And then Buelow and Jeremy James and some other pieces, they're going to compete. Jerquan Scott for that right guard position. I think that is a competition piece. I think that Nate Kalepo is going to come in and win the job. And then obviously you have Micah Pettis and you have Caleb Warren, and you have a lot of pieces coming back on Ole Miss's offensive line, to the point where I was like, man, Ole Miss could go 10 deep if you actually play 2 different lines of offensive line this year. They don't do that, but they could because of how many players they have coming back, and then just bringing 4 new players in. It's weird.
I think this Ole Miss team is one of the top contenders in the SEC next year because of what they have done this offseason. Do you feel the same way?
Yes, I think that FanDuel has it right whenever they put out their early lines for the games of the year that they did. They have Georgia and Ole Miss was a line that they put out. I think that has a chance to be the typical Alabama LSU type premier game, the Florida Tennessee from back in the day. That has a chance to be this year's game, the Georgia Ole Miss game, and it could be for all the marbles in the regular season and get to Atlanta.
Stephen Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. Appreciate the time. I am just as high as he is on what is happening down in Oxford. We'll definitely have him back on before the season ends. If you want Ole Miss content, YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, go check him out. Stephen, thanks so much.
All right, man. Take care. And I love the fact that we have a Locked On College Football. This is awesome.
Greatest sport in the world, bar none, and still more to get to on this wonderful, wonderful Friday.